Emily Carter grew up in a small town in Vermont, a place where everyone knew each other, and life moved at a gentle, predictable pace. Her parents owned a modest bakery on Main Street, where she spent most of her childhood learning how to knead dough and serve customers with a warm smile. After graduating high school, Emily received a scholarship to study business at New York University. It was her dream to one day expand her family's bakery into something bigger, a chain of cafes that would spread the comfort of home-baked pastries far and wide. New York City was a world entirely different from what Emily had known. The towering skyscrapers, the constant rush of people, and the cacophony of horns and footsteps overwhelmed her at first. But she adapted. Emily worked part-time at a bustling downtown cafe while attending classes, her days blending into a whirl of lectures and late-night shifts. It was during one of those late shifts that she first met Mark Bennett. He walked into the cafe with the air of someone who belonged in boardrooms and penthouse offices, sharp suit, polished shoes, and an aura of confidence that commanded attention. Emily, pouring his coffee, barely looked up until he spoke. "Busy night, ou?" His voice was deep, smooth, almost melodic. She glanced up, surprised that someone who looked like him would bother making small talk with someone like her. "Yeah, always is. Especially on Fridays." Mark smiled, a gesture that transformed his sharp features into something unexpectedly warm. "Well, it's good to see someone actually working hard around here." Emily chuckled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Coffee helps." From that night forward, Mark became a regular. He would stop by the cafe twice a week, sometimes more, always sitting at the same corner table, laptop open, phone buzzing incessantly. Over time, their conversations grew longer. He learned about her dream of opening a bakery. She learned that he was the heir to Bennett Corporation, one of the largest real estate companies in New York. Their connection blossomed quickly, and within months, Emily found herself swept up in Mark's world. Gala dinners, corporate events, nights out at exclusive clubs, her life was transformed. It was as if she had stepped into a fairy tale. Despite the glitz and glamour, there were shadows lurking in the corners.
Marques Moder, Victoria Bennett, meder diden for Emily known from the beginning.
During a dinner party at the Bennett's lavish penthouse, Victoria had pulled Emily aside, her voice dripping with thinly veiled hostility. "You seem like a nice girl, Emily," she had begun, her smile never reaching her eyes. "But let's not kid ourselves. My son has a future that doesn't involve a
barista."
Emily had swallowed her pride, smiled politely, and walked away. But the seed of doubt was planted. She confided in Mark, but he brushed it off. "She'll come around," he assured her, pulling her close. "It's just how she is.
Give her time."
Time, however, only seemed to deepen Victoria's disdain. When Mark proposed to Emily 6 months later, Victoria's reaction was swift and unyielding. She threatened to cut Mark off from the family fortune, to strip him of his position at Bennett Corporation. But Mark, defiant and determined, married Emily in a small ceremony against his mother's wishes. For a while, life was beautiful. They moved into a sleek apartment overlooking Central Park, and Emily believed that despite everything, love had won. She continued working part-time at the cafe, refusing to let go of the independence she had fought so hard to build. Mark continued his role at Bennett Corporation, his days filled with meetings and negotiations, but always returning to Emily's arms each night. That peace shattered when Emily discovered she was pregnant. She had waited for the perfect moment to tell Mark, setting up a candlelit dinner in their apartment. When she finally broke the news, she expected joy, excitement, maybe even tears of happiness. Instead, Mark's face went pale, his expression hardening almost immediately. "You're pregnant?" he asked, his voice clipped and distant. Emily, confused by his reaction, nodded. "Yes. I found out this morning. Isn't it wonderful?" Mark stood up abruptly, pacing the length of the living room. "No, it's not wonderful, Emily," he snapped. "We're not ready for this. My career is at its peak, and I can't afford distractions right now." His words hit her like a physical blow.
"À distraction? Mark, this is our child."
Mark turned to face her, his eyes colder than she'd ever seen them. "No, it's your child if you decide to keep it. But I'm telling you right now, I'm not ready to be a father. It's too soon."
Tears stung Emily's eyes.
"What are you saying?" Mark's jaw clenched. "I'm saying you should think about other options." Emily took a step back, disbelief written all over her face. You want me to have an abortion? Silence stretched between them, suffocating and thick. Finally, Mark nodded, his gaze unyielding. It's for the best, Emily. For both of us. Her heart shattered in that moment, splintering into 1,000 pieces. This was the man she loved, the man she had defied everything for, and he was asking her to end the life growing inside her. That night, Emily packed her things. She left a note on the kitchen counter, simple and final, I'm keeping our baby.
Don't look for me.
As she stepped out onto the rain-soaked streets of New York, her hand cradling her stomach protectively, she knew there was no turning back.
Emilie s'enchouc as she boarded the bus heading back to Greenfield, Vermont. Rain splattered against the fogged-up windows, blurring the city lights as New York faded into the distance.
She clutched her worn-out suitcase and kept her hand protectively over her stomach, whispering words of comfort to the tiny life growing inside her. Greenfield hadn't changed much since she left for college. The same narrow roads lined with maple trees, the same quaint shops dotting Main Street, and the same quietness that settled over the town like a warm blanket. It was almost as if time had paused while she was away, waiting for her to return. With nowhere else to go, Emily made her way to the old Carter family house, a modest, creaking 2-story cottage that had been left to her after her parents passed. Dust and cobwebs greeted her as she unlocked the door, but to Emily, it felt like sanctuary. This was where she would start over. The next few months were grueling. Emily spent her days cleaning the house, patching up leaky windows, and repairing broken furniture. She sold whatever she could to buy groceries and essentials. Her nights were spent working at Rosie's Diner, a local eatery that served as the heart of Greenfield's small community. The owner, Rose Harris, was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a stern demeanor. She didn't ask too many questions when Emily showed up looking for work. She simply handed her an apron and pointed to the sink. You wash dishes and help serve when it gets busy, Rose said curtly, but with a hint of warmth.
PS weekly. Don't be late.
Emily nodded gratefully. Thank you, Rose.
I promise I won't disappoint you.
Rose simply shrugged and returned to wiping the counter. Despite her bluntness, Emily could sense the woman's kindness, hidden beneath layers of tough exterior. Months turned into seasons, and Emily's belly grew round and heavy. The customers at the diner began to notice, some casting sympathetic glances her way, while others whispered behind her back.
Emily ignored the gossip.
Her focus was on survival, on giving her child the best life she could. One snowy evening, as she was locking up the diner, Rose appeared beside her, holding out a thick woolen blanket. For the baby, Rose mumbled, looking away as if embarrassed by the gesture. Emily's eyes welled up with tears. Thank you. I don't know how I can repay you. Rose waved her hand dismissively.
Just don't be late tomorrow.
We've got a big breakfast rush. Underneath that gruff exterior, Rose became Emily's pillar of support. She would leave food at Emily's doorstep, help her carry heavy boxes, and even drive her to doctor appointments when the snow was too thick to walk through. Emily never asked why Rose cared so much, and Rose never volunteered the information. It was an unspoken bond, one Emily grew to cherish deeply. The months dragged on, and as winter began to give way to spring, Emily found herself ready to give birth. It was a chilly night in March when the contractions came. Alone in her small house, she labored through the night, gripping the edges of the bed frame, sweat and tears mingling as pain racked her body. Just before dawn, Rose burst through the door, her face pale and eyes wide. I knew it. I knew you'd be too stubborn to call for help, she exclaimed, rushing to Emily's side. Emily tried to laugh, but another contraction stole her breath. I didn't want to bother anyone. Bother? Nonsense. Now hold on, I've got the car outside. We're going to the hospital. Despite Emily's protests, Rose bundled her into the passenger seat, and they sped through the winding roads toward Greenfield General Hospital. Hours later, as the morning sun crept over the mountains, the cries of 2 newborns filled the sterile walls of the delivery room. Emily held her breath as the nurses cleaned the babies, swaddled them, and placed them gently in her arms.
A boy and a girl, the nurse smiled warmly.
You have twins. Tears streamed down Emily's face as she gazed down at her children. Chloe, the little girl, with wisps of blonde hair and bright blue eyes just like hers. Mason, the boy, with dark hair and striking green eyes, a mirror image of his father. For a moment, the pain and heartbreak she had endured vanished, replaced by an overwhelming wave of love. "You did it," Rose whispered from the doorway, her eyes glistening with emotion. Emily looked up, smiling through her tears. "I couldn't have done it without you." Rose stepped closer, her expression softening.
"You're stronger than you think, Emily."
"And those two, they're going to need that strength." Emily nodded, clutching her babies close. "I won't let anything happen to them. I swear it." From that moment forward, life for Emily became a cycle of early mornings and sleepless nights. She juggled raising Chloe and Mason while working part-time at the diner, scraping together enough to pay bills and keep the house warm during the harsh Vermont winters. Rose continued to watch over them, slipping money into Emily's bag when she wasn't looking, leaving groceries on her porch. And once a month, without fail, Emily would find a white envelope in her mailbox.
"No return address, no name. Juste un handful of $100 bill inside."
Emily never spoke of it, but she knew the money was the difference between survival and losing everything. She asked Rose once if she knew anything about the mysterious envelopes, but Rose only shook her head and changed the subject. Years passed, and Chloe and Mason grew into bright, happy children. Chloe inherited her mother's kindness and gentle spirit, always eager to help around the house and make friends at school. Mason, on the other hand, was bold and fiercely protective of his sister, his sharp green eyes constantly watching, analyzing. Emily watched them with pride, knowing that every sacrifice she made was worth it. Despite the hardships, she had created a life for them, one filled with love and safety. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the past was still lurking somewhere, waiting for the right moment to resurface. And deep down, she knew that one day, Mark Bennett would come looking for what he had left behind. The years rolled by in Greenfield, Vermont, like the slow turning of seasons. Emily's life had settled into a rhythm, early mornings at Rosie's diner, afternoons with Chloe and Mason, and late nights spent balancing bills at the small kitchen table. Despite the hardships, their little family thrived. Chloe excelled in school with her sharp wit and gentle kindness, while Mason, ever the protective brother, grew into a strong and confident boy. Yet, there was one mystery that Emily couldn't quite solve: the white envelopes. They began arriving shortly after Chloe and Mason's first birthday. At first, Emily thought it was a mistake. The envelope was plain, no address, no name, only her own scrawled in neat handwriting, Emily Carter. She had opened it hesitantly, expecting nothing more than junk mail or a flyer. Instead, she found $500 in crisp bills and a note with a single line.
"For the children.
Stay safe." Her hands had trembled as she read the note. There was no signature, no indication of who had sent it. For weeks, she had pondered over its origin. She asked Rose, but Rose only shrugged, her expression unreadable. "Maybe you've got a guardian angel," Rose suggested nonchalantly as she wiped down the counter of the diner one evening. Emily scoffed, folding the envelope carefully. "A guardian angel that sends cash every month?" Rose chuckled, but there was something guarded in her eyes. "Stranger things have happened." Emily wanted to press further, but she knew Rose well enough by now. If she didn't want to talk, she wouldn't.
So, Emily let it go.
But the envelopes continued to come, month after month, always on the first Monday. Sometimes there were small notes, for winter coats, or for their birthday party, always practical, always thoughtful. Emily considered returning the money, but there was never a return address. She even went to the post office to ask about the sender, but the clerk had only shrugged and said, "They're always dropped off directly here."
"No return address, no postage."
Just, left on the counter. Against her better judgment, Emily began to rely on the mysterious envelopes. The money helped pay for Chloe and Mason's school supplies, their winter boots, the birthday presents that she never would have been able to afford on her own. As much as she hated to admit it, those envelopes were the lifeline that kept them afloat. But the question remained, who was sending them? One evening, after putting Chloe and Mason to bed, Emily sat at the kitchen table, the latest envelope lying open before her. It was thicker than usual, and inside, she found a handwritten note that made her heart stop. "They look just like him.
Stay hidden."
The words were simple, but they sent a chill down her spine. Her fingers traced the edges of the paper as if hoping to uncover some hidden clue. But there was nothing, no name, no indication of who him was. Emily knew, of course. Deep down, she always knew.
Mark Bennett.
It was the first time in years that she had allowed herself to think his name. She had buried the memories deep, locking them away beneath layers of survival and routine. But now they came flooding back, the lavish parties, the penthouse view of Central Park, the warmth of his hands, the coldness in his eyes when he told her to get rid of their child. Her hands shook as she folded the note and stuffed it back into the envelope. Was it possible that Mark had found her? Had he discovered the children he had once wanted to erase from existence? The thought sent a surge of protectiveness through her veins. Chloe and Mason were her entire world. She had sacrificed everything to keep them safe, to keep them away from the shadow of Mark Bennett and his powerful family. She couldn't let him take that away. For the next week, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She locked the doors tighter, drew the curtains earlier, and kept a close eye on the children whenever they played outside. Greenfield was a small town, strangers were easy to spot, but she saw no one suspicious.
Still, the feeling lingeait. She confided in Rose one evening after closing up the diner, the flickering fluorescent lights casting long shadow across a countertop.
Do you think he's found us? Emily whispered, her hands clenched tightly around her apron. Rose raised an eyebrow. Mark. Emily nodded. I got a note. It said the kids look just like him. And to stay hidden. For a moment, Rose's expression flickered, just a fraction, but Emily caught it. You know something, she accused softly. Rose's eyes hardened. I know a lot of things, honey. And I know that if he was coming, he would have been here already. Emily wanted to press further, but Rose straightened her back and tossed her apron over her shoulder.
You head on home. You'll close up tonight.
But.
No but.
Go on now. Emily hesitated, but she knew better than to argue with Rose. She slipped out into the cold night, glancing over her shoulder as she walked back home.
Greenfield was quiet, only the faint hum of distant traffic breaking the silence.
Her breath misted in the air, swirling like ghosts in the moonlight. When she reached her front porch, she stopped. There, lying neatly on the welcome mat, was another white envelope. Her heart clenched. Emily glanced around, but the street was empty.
No footsteps, no voices, juste silence.
Her fingers shook as she picked it up. The handwriting was the same as always, neat, elegant, precise. She opened it with trembling hands, pulling out the folded note inside. He's looking for you. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The words were simple but heavy with implication. Whoever was sending these letters knew more than she realized. A sense of dread settled over her, heavier than she had ever felt before. Was this person trying to protect her, or were they watching her? One thing was certain, if Mark Bennett was looking for her, then her days of hiding in Greenfield might soon be coming to an end. Spring had arrived in Greenfield, and with it came the annual town festival. Main Street was bustling with vendors, colorful banners hung from lamp posts, and the sweet scent of caramel apples and fresh popcorn wafted through the air. Chloe and Mason ran ahead of Emily, their laughter ringing out as they chased each other through the crowds.
Stay where he can see you.
Emily called out, clutching her jacket tighter against the brisk breeze. Yes, Mom. Mason yelled back, waving enthusiastically before darting behind a stall with his sister. Emily smiled, her heart swelling with pride. They had grown so much, Chloe with her bright eyes and gentle nature, and Mason bold and protective, always watching out for his twin. The festival brought out everyone in town, and this year was no exception. Emily made her way through the crowd, greeting neighbors, accepting warm hugs, and engaging in small talk with familiar faces. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to forget the looming threat of those mysterious letters. Here, surrounded by laughter and familiar voices, everything felt safe. But safety is often just an illusion. At the edge of the festival, parked beside the large Ferris wheel, was a sleek black SUV. The car was polished to a mirror-like shine, and its tinted windows reflected the bright lights of the carnival. Two men in suits stood beside it, scanning the crowd with practiced eyes. One of them spoke into his earpiece, nodding curtly before stepping back to open the passenger door. A man emerged, tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that screamed wealth and power. His hair was neatly combed back, sharp eyes hidden behind designer sunglasses. He paused for a moment, straightening his cuffs before adjusting his coat. When he finally removed his sunglasses, his gaze settled on the festival with a look of mild curiosity. Mark Bennett had arrived in Greenfield. As he walked through the crowd, people turned to look, whispers trailing in his wake. He was out of place, too sharp, too polished for this small-town celebration. Mark ignored the stares, his eyes scanning the sea of faces with purpose. Meanwhile, Chloe and Mason weaved through the rows of stalls, giggling as they chased each other around hay bales and food carts. Mason spotted a stand selling handcrafted toys and tugged Chloe's hand.
Look, wooden train.
Chloe squealed with delight as they ran up to the stand, their hands exploring the colorful toys laid out in neat rows. The vendor, an elderly man with a kind smile, handed them each a small wooden car.
For you too.
They're a matching set, just like you, he chuckled. Thank you, they chorused, clutching the toys tightly. As they turned to run back to Emily, Mason suddenly froze. Chloe bumped into him, almost dropping her car. Hey, why'd you stop? She complained. Mason didn't answer. His eyes were locked on a tall man standing a few yards away, his gaze fixed on them. Chloe followed Mason's line of sight and saw him too. The man's expression was unreadable, his sharp features rigid, but his eyes were the same shade of emerald green as Mason's. The man took a step forward. Chloe instinctively grabbed Mason's arm, pulling him back.
Comment, Mason?
We need to find Mom, she whispered, fear creeping into her voice. But Mason didn't move. His gaze was fixed, unblinking. It was as if he recognized the man, some distant memory etched into his bones. Hey, you two, the man called out, his voice smooth and firm. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Mason's face. What are your names? Mason hesitated, his small hands clenching the wooden car tighter. Chloe, ever the cautious one, took a step back, pulling her brother with her. We need to go, she whispered urgently. But before they could retreat, the man knelt down to their height, his eyes softening just a fraction. I'm not going to hurt you. I promise.
I just want to talk.
Chloe shook her head, her grip on Mason tightening. We're not supposed to talk to strangers. A flicker of emotion crossed the man's face, regret, maybe pain. He nodded, straightening up.
You're right.
You should always listen to your mother. His gaze drifted past them, scanning the crowd. Where is she? Suddenly, Emily appeared from the throng of people, her face pale as a sheet. Her eyes locked onto Mark, disbelief flooding her features. She moved quickly, instinctively placing herself between him and the children. Get away from them, she demanded, her voice steady but laced with fear. Mark straightened, his expression hardening. Emily.
Emilie's eyes blazed with anger.
How did you find us? Mark's lips curled into a half-smile. Did you really think you could hide forever? He looked over her shoulder, his eyes settling once more on Chloe and Mason. I knew the moment I saw them. They look just like me. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, her hands gripping the children protectively. You have no right. They're my children, Mark interrupted, his voice firm. I have every right. Emily felt her breath catch, fury boiling to the surface. You lost that right the moment you told me to get rid of them. For the first time, Mark's expression faltered. His eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite place, regret perhaps? Pain? But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. That was a mistake, he said finally, his voice dropping to a softer tone. But I'm here now.
Emily shook her head, her eyes burning. It's too late.
Mark took a step forward, lowering his voice. No, it's not. I'm not leaving without them. We need to talk. Chloe clutched Emily's hand tighter, her eyes wide with confusion. Mason stared at Mark, unblinking, as if trying to piece together a puzzle. Emily held her ground, her voice barely above a whisper.
I won't let you take them.
Mark's eyes hardened. We'll see about that. And with that, the festival lights seemed to dim just a little, the laughter around them distant and hollow. Mark turned and walked away, his silhouette cutting through the crowd like a shadow, leaving Emily clutching her children, her heart pounding with fear and fury. The past had finally caught up with her. The festival continued in full swing, oblivious to the storm that had just erupted near the Ferris wheel. Emily held Chloe and Mason close, her heart pounding as she watched Mark disappear into the crowd. Her mind was spinning, thoughts crashing into each other in a frantic whirlwind. He had found them. After 7 long years, Mark Bennett had come back. We need to go, Emily whispered, her voice trembling. She pulled the children towards the car parked on the edge of Main Street, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the keys. Mom, who was that man? Chloe asked softly, her bright blue eyes wide with confusion. Emily forced a smile, her hand gently brushing Chloe's cheek. Just, someone I used to know, she replied, her voice tight. But you don't need to worry about him, okay? Mason stared up at his mother, his green eyes, Mark's eyes, searching her face for answers. He said we looked like him, Mason murmured. Why did he say that? Emily's heart clenched. She knew this day would come, that she would eventually have to explain everything, but she wasn't ready.
Not here, not now.
We'll talk about it at home, she promised, starting the car and pulling away from the festival lights, leaving the laughter and music fading behind them. The drive back to their house was silent. Emily's knuckles were white against the steering wheel, her eyes fixed on the road but her mind miles away. How did he find them? And more importantly, what did he want? Her thoughts swirled with fear and confusion. The letters, the warnings, it had all been leading to this. When they arrived home, Emily ushered the kids inside, locking the door behind her and drawing the curtains tight. She sat them down at the small kitchen table, her hands shaking as she poured them each a glass of milk. Chloe and Mason exchanged glances. Finally, Mason spoke up, his voice steady. Mom, who was that man? He knew our names. Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself. That man. His name is Mark Bennett, she began slowly, her eyes fixed on the wooden table. He's your father. A heavy silence settled over the room. Chloe's eyes went wide with shock, her hands clutching the glass of milk tightly. Mason, on the other hand, leaned back in his chair, his expression unchanging, as if he had already suspected. Our dad. Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible. Why isn't he here with us? Emily swallowed hard, choosing her words carefully. Because he didn't want to be. Her voice cracked, but she held firm. When I found out I was pregnant, he didn't want you. He wanted me to get rid of you. Chloe's eyes filled with tears, and Mason's jaw clenched, his small hands curling into fists. He didn't want us? Mason asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Emily reached out, placing her hands over theirs. No, sweetheart. But I did. I wanted you both more than anything in this world. That's why we left New York. That's why we came here, to keep you safe, to give you a good life. Chloe sniffled, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. So, he's not going to take us away, right? Emily's eyes hardened. No. I won't let him.
Su dans lit, à knock et chouette trous the house.
Emily jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. She stood quickly, motioning for the kids to stay put. She peeked through the curtain, her breath catching when she saw Rose standing on the porch, her expression grim. Emily unlocked the door and pulled it open. Rose, what are you doing here? Rose stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her eyes sharp and full of purpose. We need to talk, she said firmly, glancing over at Chloe and Mason still seated at the table. Right now. Emily nodded, ushering Rose into the small living room. She shut the door behind them, her mind racing.
Did you know? Émilie demanded, her voice barely above a whisper.
Did you know he was coming? Rose's face softened, but she didn't deny it. I suspected, she admitted. The letters, they were warnings. I didn't know when, but I knew it would happen eventually.
Émilie en shook at her seed.
Why didn't you tell me? Rose met her gaze evenly. Would it have changed anything?
You were happy.
You were safe, at least for a while. Safe. Emily echoed, her voice trembling with anger. You call this safe? He found us. He's going to take them away. Rose stepped forward, her hands gripping Emily's shoulders firmly.
Listen to me.
He can only take them if you let him.
You have the law on your side.
You've been their sole guardian since birth. He has no claim to them. But he's powerful, Emily whispered, her eyes welling up with tears.
You don't understand, Rose.
He has money. He has connections. He can make things happen. Rose's eyes flashed with determination. Not here, he can't.
This is Greenfield, not New York.
He's out of his element. He's playing by your rules now. Emily took a deep, shuddering breath. For the first time since seeing Mark again, she felt a flicker of hope. So what do we do? Rose released her grip, crossing her arms firmly. We prepare. He's not going to go away easily.
Et elle push, and elle pushard.
But we'll be ready. Emily nodded, a steely resolve settling in her heart. For 7 years, she had fought for her children, building a life from nothing, sacrificing everything to give them safety. She wasn't about to let Mark Bennett waltz back in and tear it all apart. Rose's eyes softened as she placed a hand on Emily's shoulder.
You're stranger than you think, Emily.
You always have been. Emily straightened, her gaze firm. Then let him come.
I'm not afraid anymore.
Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows of the small house. Somewhere, in the darkness beyond the trees, headlights flashed briefly before disappearing into the shadows. Mark Bennett was coming. But this time, Emily Carter would be ready. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Greenfield as Emily sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of steaming tea. Outside, the streets were quiet, the hum of festival laughter now just a distant memory. Across from her, Rose Harris sat with a steely expression, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Emily took a deep breath, breaking the silence. You know more than you're telling me, Rose. Those letters, the warnings, you knew he was coming. Rose didn't flinch. She met Emily's gaze with unwavering steadiness. I did. Emily set her mug down, leaning forward. Why? How did you know? And why were you helping me? Rose's eyes flickered, just for a moment, as if she were weighing her options. Finally, she sighed, leaning back in her chair.
I suppose it's time you knew the truth.
Emily watched as Rose reached into her purse, pulling out a worn leather envelope, the edges frayed from years of handling. She slid it across the table, her hands shaking just slightly. Open it. With hesitant fingers, Emily flipped the clasp and pulled out a stack of old photographs. Some were yellowed with age, others creased and fragile. As she sifted through them, her breath caught in her throat. There, staring back at her, was a young woman with sharp green eyes and dark hair, eyes that looked eerily familiar.
That is you? Emily whispered, holding up the photograph. Rose shook her head slowly.
No.
That is my sister. Victoria. Emily's eyes widened in shock. Victoria Bennett?
Mark's mother. Rose nodded, her gaze hardening. She wasn't always Victoria Bennett. She was born Victoria Harris. My sister. Emily sat back, her mind spinning. You're Mark's aunt. Half-aunt technically, Rose corrected, her voice tight. We shared the same father. He wasn't exactly the faithful type. She paused, her eyes growing distant.
My mother raised me alone.
Victoria grew up with privilege, with wealth, and she never acknowledged me. Not once.
Emily's at sank.
You've been watching them all these years? Rose's gaze snapped back, sharp and unyielding. I've been watching her. She destroyed everything in her path to get where she is. Anyone who stood in her way was pushed aside or ruined. And I wasn't going to let that happen to you. Emily's hands trembled as she set the photographs down. The letters, it was you.
You sans the money.
Rose nodded. I knew you needed help. And I knew one day Mark would come looking. I tried to delay it as long as I could. But money and power, they have a way of finding what they want. Emily rubbed her temples, trying to process everything. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you warn me? I did, Rose said simply. But would you have believed me if I had told you that the woman running one of the largest corporations in New York is my half-sister? That she would stop at nothing to control her legacy, even if it meant destroying her own son? Emily swallowed hard, memories of Victoria's cold, calculating gaze flashing through her mind. She tried to force me to get rid of them, Emily whispered, her voice cracking. She threatened me, said she would make my life a living hell if I didn't.
Rose's expression hardened.
And she would have. She's done it before. Emily's eyes snapped up. Before. Rose hesitated, but only for a moment. You're not the first. Mark was engaged once before you.
A woman named Catherine Shaw. She got pregnant.
Victoria paid her off, sent her away, and had the records scrubbed clean.
Mark never saw her again. Emilies briscogged. Et never knew. Rose shook her head. No.
Victoria convinced him that Catherine had left for greener pastures. He moved on, threw himself into work, and then he met you. Emily's hands clenched into fists.
How could she do that?
How could she be so cruel? Rose leaned forward, her eyes blazing with determination. Because to her, everything is about control. Mark is her legacy. Bennett Corporation is her empire, and she won't let anyone jeopardize that. Not you, not Catherine, and certainly not me. Emily leaned back in her chair, the weight of the truth settling over her like a suffocating blanket. She had known Victoria was powerful, ruthless even, but this was a different level of manipulation. She had torn apart lives without a second thought, and she had tried to do the same to Emily. She won't stop, you know, Rose added quietly. Now that Mark knows about Chloe and Mason, she'll do whatever it takes to make sure they belong to her. She'll paint you as unfit, a nobody from a small town trying to milk the Bennett fortune. Emily's eyes flared with anger. I don't want her money.
I just want my children.
Rose nodded, her gaze softening. I know. That's why I'm going to help you.
Emilies' eyes widened.
Help me? How? Rose leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper.
Victoria isn't untouchable. She's made mistakes, big ones.
And I've been keeping track for years. If you want to keep your children safe, you'll need leverage. Proof that she's not as perfect as she pretends to be. Emily's heart pounded. You have that proof? Rose's lips curled into a sly smile. I have enough to make her wish she had never heard your name. Hope sparked in Emily's chest, mingling with the fear that had settled there since Mark's return. For the first time since she saw him at the festival, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel, confidence. Then we fight, Emily whispered, her voice stronger than she expected.
We fight back.
Rose reached across the table, placing her hand over Emily's.
That's the spirit.
But we have to be smart.
Victoria won't hesitate to play dirty.
And neither will Mark. Emily nodded firmly. I'm ready. The two women shared a determined look, a silent agreement forged between them. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the chill of an approaching storm. But this time, Emily wouldn't face it alone. The morning fog clung to the quiet streets of Greenfield, wrapping the town in a shroud of mist as Emily prepared breakfast for Chloe and Mason. The kids sat at the kitchen table, chattering away about school and the upcoming class trip to the local museum. Emily smiled, trying to suppress the growing anxiety that had settled in her chest ever since Mark reappeared. Just as she was pouring Mason a glass of orange juice, a sharp knock echoed through the house. Emily's hand froze mid-air, her heart lurching. She exchanged a quick glance with Mason, who raised an eyebrow. Are you expecting someone? He asked. No, Emily replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She set the glass down and walked cautiously toward the door. Peeking through the window, her heart sank. Parked in front of her house was a black limousine, sleek and polished. Two men in tailored suits stood rigidly by the doors, their eyes scanning the property with military precision.
Emilies briscogged.
She knew exactly who was behind that door. Steeling herself, she unlocked it and pulled it open. Victoria Bennett stood on the porch, her posture as straight as a ruler, chin held high, eyes sharp and unyielding. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored coat, her heels clicking against the wooden steps as she stepped forward. Her gaze swept over Emily with thinly veiled disdain. Well, Victoria began, her voice cool and measured. I must say, it's exactly the kind of place I imagined you'd end up. Emily straightened her back, refusing to be intimidated. What are you doing here, Victoria? Victoria raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on her red-painted lips. I'm here to collect what belongs to my family. Emily's fists clenched at her sides. They are not your property. Chloe and Mason are my children. Victoria's eyes glimmered with amusement. Are they? Because as far as I understand, their father was never given a choice. You took them and ran. That's called kidnapping where I come from. Emily's jaw tightened. I didn't kidnap anyone. I left because you and your son tried to force me into something I couldn't do. You threatened me, Victoria.
I won't forget that.
Victoria's expression didn't waver. What's done is done. But now that Mark has found you, it's time to fix the mistakes of the past. She reached into her handbag, pulling out a crisp envelope, and handed it to Emily. Emily hesitated, but finally took it, ripping it open. Inside was a thick stack of legal documents. At the top, the bold letters read, "Petition for custody of Chloe and Mason Bennett." Emily's hands shook as she flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the legal jargon. "You're suing me for custody," she whispered, disbelief etched in her voice. Victoria tilted her head, her gaze unyielding. "You didn't think you could hide them forever, did you? You deprived Mark of his children for 7 years. 7 years of memories, birthdays, holidays. You stole that from him. Now it's time to make things right." Emily's eyes burned with fury.
Make things right?
"You forced me out. You threatened me. And now you want to just take them away? They don't even know him." "They will," Victoria replied calmly, her tone almost patronizing. "We can give them a life you never could. Private schools, the best education, travel, connections. What do you have to offer them here?" Her eyes flicked over Emily's modest home with thinly veiled disgust.
A cramped house in the middle of nowhere?
A mother who scrubs floors and serves coffee for a living.
Emilie s'en tightened around the papers, knuckle white with tension.
I have given them love, protection, and a real family. Something neither you nor Mark could ever understand.
Victoria's expression hardened.
Enough of this fantasy. My lawyers will be in touch. I suggest you get yourself a good attorney, if you can afford one. She turned sharply on her heel, heels clicking against the wooden steps with every measured step back to the car. Before she climbed inside, Victoria glanced back, her eyes cold and sharp.
You always get what you want, Emily.
And I want my grandchildren. The limousine door slammed shut, and the car pulled away, its taillights fading into the morning mist. Emily stood frozen on the porch, the papers still clutched in her hands, her heart pounding so loudly she thought it might burst. She barely heard the small footsteps behind her. "Mom." Mason's voice was soft, trembling. "Who was that lady?" Emily swallowed hard, her hands shaking as she turned to face her children. Both Chloe and Mason stood in the doorway, eyes wide with fear and confusion. Emily forced a smile, though it wavered. That was just someone who got lost.
Chloé stepped forward, her eyes searching Emilie's face.
She looked really mad. "Are you okay, Mom?" Emily knelt down, gathering both of them into her arms, holding them tightly.
I'm fine, sweetheart.
"I promise." But even as she said it, her mind was reeling. Victoria was going to take them. She had the money, the lawyers, the influence. Emily knew she couldn't fight this alone.
Rose.
The name surfaced in her mind like a lifeline. She needed to find Rose. She needed to know exactly what they were up against. Emily pulled back, brushing the hair from Mason's eyes. "Listen, I need you two to stay here, okay? I have to go see someone."
I won't be long. Are you in trouble?
Mason asked, his green eyes filled with worry. Emily forced a smile. "Not if I can help it." She kissed both of them on their foreheads and grabbed her coat, stepping out onto the porch. She locked the door behind her and started down the road, her mind racing. If there was anyone who could help her, it was Rose. But even as she hurried down the quiet streets of Greenfield, a shadow of doubt crept into her heart. Victoria was powerful, powerful enough to erase people from existence, to manipulate lives with the stroke of a pen. What chance did Emily have against that kind of influence? Her footsteps quickened as she rounded the corner, Rose's cafe just coming into view. Emily's breath was ragged, her heart pounding. If there was ever a time for secrets to be unveiled and alliances to be forged, it was now. Because Victoria Bennett was coming for her children. And Emily would die before she let that happen. The rain drummed steadily against the glass walls of Bennett Corporation's headquarters in Manhattan. Mark stood by the window of his corner office, eyes fixed on the city skyline, his thoughts miles away in Greenfield. It had been days since the festival, days since he had looked into the eyes of his children for the very first time.
Chloé and Mason.
The names felt foreign yet familiar, echoing in his mind like a distant melody. His fingers traced the edge of the envelope on his desk, the legal documents that his mother, Victoria, had delivered to Emily's doorstep. A custody petition, signed and stamped, backed by the most powerful legal team in New York. His mother had made her intentions clear. Chloe and Mason would be brought into the Bennett fold, no matter the cost.
À Knock, on the door broke his rêverie.
He turned to see Victoria stride in, her heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. She moved with an air of confidence, her posture flawless, her chin held high. "I take it you've seen the paperwork," she said coolly, gesturing to the stack of documents on his desk. Mark nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "I saw it." Victoria smiled, setting her handbag down and crossing the room to stand beside him. "Good. It's about time we brought those children back where they belong." Mark's eyes narrowed.
Belong?
"You talk about them like they're assets, Mother. They're not just names on a ledger." Victoria arched an eyebrow, her expression unmoved. "They are Bennett's, Mark. Their birthright is tied to this family, whether that woman wants to accept it or not. I won't have my grandchildren growing up in squalor." Mark's fists clenched at his sides. He had visited Greenfield, he had seen Emily's house, the modest living, the small bakery where she worked. It wasn't grand, but it was warm, welcoming, happy. Chloe and Mason had been laughing, running around with joy that he hadn't seen in a long time.
A stark contrast to the cold, marble hall of the Bennett estate.
"They seemed happy," Mark replied, his voice steady. "They were smiling, laughing. They had friends." Victoria scoffed, waving a manicured hand dismissively. "Happy?" she repeated, almost laughing. "What do they know about happiness?
A rickety house?
A mother working as a waitress? Do you think that's enough? What kind of future can she possibly give them?" Mark's eyes flared with defiance. She gave them everything she could. They weren't starving. They weren't struggling. They were loved.
Victoria's smile faltered juste a bit.
Her eyes grew colder, sharper. Love doesn't pay for education. It doesn't secure their future. It doesn't protect them from the real world. Mark turned away from the window, facing his mother fully. "And what exactly is your idea of protecting them? Dragging them away from the only life they've known? Ripping them from their mother's arms? Forcing them into the Bennett name just to satisfy your ego?"
Victoria's eyes blazed with fury.
"Watch your tone, Mark," she warned, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You forget who built this empire.
Who gave you everything?"
Mark's jaw clenched. He knew she was right, in a way. Victoria had built Bennett Corporation from the ground up after his father passed, expanding it into a real estate powerhouse. She had sacrificed everything for power, control, legacy. But at what cost? Taking a deep breath, he straightened his shoulders. "Mother, I won't be part of this. I won't tear those kids away from their mother just to satisfy your idea of a perfect family." Victoria's eyes turned icy.
"You don't have a choice.
The papers are signed. The process is in motion. Unless you intend to contest it, which, I assure you, would be a monumental mistake." Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Finally, Mark stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "Maybe it's time for mistakes," he said quietly. "Maybe it's time I did what was right for once." Victoria's face hardened, her jaw tightening. "And what exactly does that mean?" Mark hesitated, but only for a moment. "I'm going to Greenfield," he announced, his voice resolute. "I'm going to talk to Emily. To the kids. I want to do this the right way." A flicker of panic crossed Victoria's face before she masked it with cold indifference. "You think she's just going to hand them over? Out of the goodness of her heart? Don't be naive, Mark." Mark's eyes didn't waver. "I'm not asking her to hand them over. I'm asking to be part of their lives. Properly. Without force. Without lawyers." Victoria's expression shifted from disbelief to outright disdain. "And if she says no?" Mark's voice dropped, steady and unyielding. "Then I'll respect her decision." The silence that followed was sharp, brittle, like glass about to shatter.
Victoria's uncurled into fist at her side.
"If you walk away from this, from the fight for custody, you are walking away from everything. Do you understand me?" Mark's heart pounded, but he held her gaze. Ido. Victoria took a step forward, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. You'll lose it all. Your position here. The estate. The company. Everything your father built for you. Mark swallowed, the weight of her words settling heavy in his chest. Maybe it's time I built something for myself, he replied, his voice steady. Victoria's eyes flashed with rage. You're making a mistake, Mark. He shook his head. No. I made a mistake 7 years ago when I let you convince me that she wasn't good enough. That they weren't good enough. He straightened, his voice growing stronger. But I'm not making that mistake again. Victoria's face paled, her grip tightening on her handbag. If you walk out that door, you're on your own. Mark met her gaze head-on, his voice unwavering. I understand. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the office, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous hallway. For the first time in his life, Mark Bennett felt the weight of true freedom, and the crushing fear of what might come next. But as he stepped into the elevator and the doors slid shut, his thoughts returned to Greenfield. To Chloe and Mason's bright eyes, to Emily's defiant stare. He wasn't walking away. He was going home. The drive back to Greenfield was long and silent, with only the hum of the engine accompanying Mark's thoughts. He replayed the argument with his mother over and over, her final words echoing in his mind, if you walk out that door, you're on your own. For the first time in his life, Mark was free from the weight of Bennett Corporation, free from his mother's expectations and her relentless grip on his choices. But that freedom also came with fear, fear of the unknown, fear of starting from nothing. Yet, amidst all that fear, there was something else, hope. Hope that he could make things right. Greenfield was just as he remembered, quaint, quiet, untouched by the chaos of city life. He parked his car outside Rose's diner, its familiar red sign swaying gently in the morning breeze. Stepping out, he took a deep breath, the crisp air filling his lungs. Inside the diner, the bell jingled as he opened the door, and all conversation seemed to pause. Rose looked up from behind the counter, her eyes narrowing as she recognized him. Well, look who decided to come back, she said, voice dripping with suspicion. Mark cleared his throat, walking up to the counter. I need to talk to her, he said plainly. I need to talk to Emily. Rose folded her arms across her chest, eyes steely. Last time you showed up, you nearly gave her a heart attack. Why should I tell you where she is? Because I'm not here to take anything away, Mark replied, his voice firm but steady. I just want to see them. To know them. He hesitated, then added quietly, to be their father. Rose's eyes softened just a fraction, but her stance remained guarded. She wiped her hands on her apron, nodding to the empty booth by the window. Sit. I'll get you some coffee. We need to talk. Mark slid into the booth, the cracked leather squeaking beneath him. A moment later, Rose set a steaming cup of coffee in front of him, sliding into the seat opposite. She studied him carefully, her gaze sharp and unyielding. You know, Rose began, her voice low, I watched that girl struggle for 7 years to raise those kids. Alone. No money, no help, nothing but grit and sheer willpower. She leaned forward, her eyes locked onto his. You don't get to just walk back in and play hero. Mark met her gaze head-on. I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm just trying to fix what I broke. Rose scoffed, but there was a hint of respect in her eyes. Fixing it won't be easy. Emily, she's strong. Stronger than you remember. And those kids? They don't know you. Mark nodded, his hands clasping the coffee cup tightly. I know. I'm not asking for miracles. I'm just asking for a chance. Rose watched him carefully, then sighed, reaching for her notebook. She scribbled something quickly, tearing the page out and sliding it across the table. That's her address. But don't you dare go there without thinking long and hard about what you're going to say. If you break her heart again, I swear to God, I will make sure you regret it. Mark looked down at the paper, his heart pounding. I promise. Rose leaned back, crossing her arms. I'll hold you to that. Without another word, Mark stood, tucking the paper into his pocket. He nodded to Rose, who only watched him with wary eyes as he left the diner. The drive to Emily's house felt like it took a lifetime. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, anxiety clawing its way up his throat. What would he say? How would she react? Would Chloe and Mason even recognize him? He had no answers, only determination. When he finally pulled up to the small house, he saw Chloe and Mason playing in the front yard, tossing a ball back and forth, their laughter ringing out in the crisp morning air. Mark's heart clenched at the sight of them, so full of life, so bright. His children. He stepped out of the car slowly, not wanting to startle them. Mason noticed him first, the ball slipping from his hands as he stared. Chloe turned, her eyes widening in surprise. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Mason broke the silence. You're that man from the festival. Mark managed a smile, though his hands shook. I am. He hesitated, then added softly, my name is Mark. I'm
your father.
Chloe glanced at Mason, then back at Mark. Her brow furrowed in confusion. You're our dad. Mark nodded, taking a careful step forward. Yes. And I know it's probably confusing, and maybe even scary. But I'm here because I want to get to know you. If you'll let me. Mason crossed his arms, his green eyes, the very same shade as Mark's, narrowing in suspicion. Where have you been? The question hit Mark like a punch to the gut. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to hold Mason's gaze. I wasn't there, he said finally, his voice cracking. I wasn't there when I should have been. And I'm sorry.
Chloé stepped closer, her eyes softened, curious. Are you staying now?
Mark nodded, emotion tightening his throat. If you'll have me. Before either of them could respond, the front door swung open, and Emily stepped out onto the porch. Her eyes went wide when she saw Mark standing there, talking to her children. Her heart lurched in her chest, fear and anger surging in equal measure. What are you doing here? She demanded, her voice sharp. Mark turned to face her, his expression filled with longing and determination.
I'm here to talk.
To you. To them. To fix this. Emily's eyes hardened. You think you can just waltz back into their lives?
Into my life.
Mark took a step forward, his hands raised in surrender. No. I don't. But I'm asking for the chance to try. I'm not here to take them, Emily. I swear. I just want to know them. To be their father. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Chloe and Mason watched with wide eyes, their gazes darting back and forth between their parents. Emily's jaw clenched, her eyes glimmering with unshed tears. I don't trust you, she whispered. Mark nodded, accepting the blow.
I understand.
But I'm not leaving. He met her gaze with unwavering conviction. Not again. Emily stared at him for a long moment, her defenses cracking just slightly. Finally, she nodded toward the porch. Fine. You want to talk? Then come inside. Mark's heart leaped. He glanced back at Chloe and Mason, offering them a tentative smile. Chloe smiled back, just a little, while Mason simply watched him with unblinking eyes. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was a beginning. The living room of Emily's small house was filled with tension, so thick it could be cut with a knife. Mark sat on the worn-out sofa, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, while Emily stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the rain streaking down the glass. Chloe and Mason had been sent to their room, though they had protested, their curiosity palpable. Emily finally broke the silence, her voice steady but sharp. You think you can just walk back in here and everything will be fine? That you can just make things right after all this time? Mark met her gaze, his eyes steady. I know I can't undo what happened. But I want to try. For them. For us. Emily scoffed, shaking her head. There is no us. There hasn't been for a long time. Mark swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay calm. I understand that. But Emily, I'm not here to take them from you. I just want to be their father.
Emily's eyes blazed with fury.
You mean like you wanted to be their father 7 years ago? When you told me to get rid of them? Her voice cracked, and she blinked rapidly to keep the tears from falling. Mark's jaw tightened, his hands gripping his knees. I was wrong. I know that. I was young, stupid, blinded by everything.
Il est my mother manipulate me.
He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. But I swear to you, I'm not that man anymore. Emily stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception. But all she saw was sincerity and regret. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "It's not just me you have to convince," she said finally. "It's them. Chloe and Mason, they don't know you." Mark nodded, determination flickering in his eyes. "Then let me get to know them. Give me that chance." Before Emily could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Both of them turned, surprised. Emily hesitated before moving to open it. Standing on the porch, drenched from the rain, was Rose. Her hair was plastered to her forehead, and she clutched a bundle of papers to her chest. Her eyes were fierce and unyielding. "You need to see this," Rose announced, brushing past Emily and stepping inside, dripping water onto the carpet. She cast a quick glance at Mark, her expression unreadable. "I found something. Something you both need to know." Emily closed the door, her heart pounding. "What is it?" Rose set the bundle of papers on the coffee table, spreading them out with deliberate care. Newspaper clippings, photographs, and legal documents filled the surface. Emily's eyes skimmed the headlines: "Real estate heiress accused of fraud, disappearance of Catherine Shaw remains unsolved, Bennett Corporation faces allegations of corruption." Mark stepped forward, his brow furrowing. "What is all this?" Rose met his gaze, her eyes sharp. "It's everything Victoria has been hiding. For decades." She picked up a photograph of a young woman with auburn hair, her smile bright and carefree. "Catherine Shaw. She was your fiancée before Emily, wasn't she?" Mark's eyes flickered with surprise. "Yes, but she left. My mother said she moved away, that she didn't want the responsibility." Rose's eyes hardened. "No. She didn't move away. She disappeared. Vanished. And no one ever saw her again." Mark took a step back, disbelief etched across his face. D'était-ce impossible? I saw the letters. I saw the notes she left." Rose shook her head. "Those notes were fabricated. Catherine was pregnant, Mark. She came to Victoria for help, and Victoria made her disappear." Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Are you saying?" Rose nodded grimly. "I don't know where she is, but I know she didn't leave of her own will. Victoria has been covering her tracks for years. And Catherine wasn't the first." Mark staggered back, collapsing onto the sofa. His hands covered his face as the weight of the revelation crashed over him. "No. She wouldn't. She couldn't." Emily sat down beside him, her hand hovering just above his shoulder. "You know she would, Mark. You know exactly what she's capable of." Rose continued, her voice firm. "Victoria Bennett has been manipulating you your whole life. Controlling who you love, who you marry, who you can have children with. She's erased people, Mark. And she almost erased Emily, and your children." The room fell silent, the rain tapping insistently against the windowpane. Mark's hands dropped from his face, his eyes bloodshot and filled with rage. "We have to stop her." Rose nodded. "We will. But we need proof. Solid proof. I've been collecting this for years," she gestured to the documents, "but it's not enough. We need someone on the inside." Mark's eyes hardened with determination. "I'll go back. I'll gather everything we need. I'll expose her." Emily's eyes widened. "You can't go back there. She'll know." Mark looked at her, his expression resolute. "She won't. Not until it's too late." He turned to Rose. "Help me. Help me bring her down." Rose smiled, a flicker of hope dancing in her eyes. "I've been waiting for you to say that for a long time." Emily stood, her fists clenched. "And what about Chloe and Mason? What if she tries to take them while you're gone?" Rose reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a worn envelope. "She won't. Because we're going to make sure she can't." Emily took the envelope, opening it carefully. Inside were legal papers, custody documents and restraining orders drafted but never filed. Rose pointed to the signature line. "Sign those. Tomorrow morning, we'll have them stamped and official. She won't be able to come within 100 feet of you or the children." Emily looked up, her eyes shimmering with tears. "You did all this?" Rose shrugged, but her smile was warm. I told you. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. Mark stood, his eyes blazing with purpose. We end this. Together. Emily nodded, clutching the papers to her chest. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't dared to feel: hope. Outside, the rain began to lighten, the clouds parting just enough for a sliver of sunlight to break through. It cast a beam across the living room floor, bright and unyielding, a symbol of the storm that was about to come, and the light that would finally expose the truth.